also the How to Observe and Support Universal Design for Learning session presented by Laura Palen. Laura is a science supervisor in the Single Subjects Masters of Arts in Teaching program and the CalTeach credentialing program at UC Irvine. She has supervised science and math candidate teachers since January of 2009, and for several years served as the PAC teaching event coordinator along with Patty Lambert, an ELA supervisor in the MAT program. Laura's presentation today will focus on how to train teacher candidates on the use of universal design for learning in their lesson planning and classroom teaching in order to support the diverse learners in their class. Laura, it is a pleasure to have you share on this important and timely topic today.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. If you would like to watch this on a separate screen, which is one of the things that I find interesting about UDL, is if you can open another tab on your device and go to bit.ly/UDL_Palen. So this is an aspect of UDL that I find important also, is that one of the most important principles of UDL is access. And access for many of our students on remote devices is problematic. But by using bit.ly, you can post a lot of things that can be accessed easily from a phone, from a tablet, from a computer, from just about anything without a sign-in or anything of that sort. You have to be careful what you post because it's public, but it's actually a really good platform for reaching students and anyone else and not having to worry about signing into Google Classroom or Schoology or any other service. So also from there, you can click to links. So if you're on the bit.ly site, you'll see the title as Universal Design for Learning and some figures there for why it matters that we have universal design. And I think that this little graphic captures it really well. These students are coming from everywhere. Language differences, cultural differences, certainly attention spans, age differences, different educational backgrounds, and needing different forms of learning modalities. Okay, can you click the next screen, please? So I thought it would be important maybe to go back and look at where this comes from. So universal design from learning comes from something called universal design. And universal design has its roots pretty far back, but the most documented roots start in the 60s when we started putting in the curb depressions that allow wheelchairs, and strollers, and bicycles, and things like that to get on and off of a sidewalk. And then it was further codified in architecture and building in order to make buildings more accessible by businesses, because they began to realize that not everyone is equally gifted physically. That was the first aspect, or in other ways. So eventually we reached something called the American Disabilities Act, which was just celebrated their 30th anniversary this past weekend. Along the way, a small group got together. Can I have next slide, please? And realized that a lot of this applied to the educational environment as well. So adaptations that were made for persons with disabilities in many functions needed to be in the schools. And so it became a physical challenge within the schools. They needed to put in elevators and ramps and other things like this. But beyond that, then you can see that as also becoming a learning modality or learning approach consideration as well. So thus was born not just universal design, but universal design for learning. Okay, so along the way, I put some links in here that'll take you back to more of the history of where this comes from and why it has blossomed the way it has. So next slide, please. All right, so the organization that gave birth basically to UDL is CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technology out of Massachusetts in Boston. It is a nonprofit that is still doing much good work today and is realizing that we're moving into the remote environment, so is doing now work in that realm as well. So Universal Design for Learning reaches out to multiple organizations and is working on curriculum planning, software development, state and national policy, teacher preparation and support, which is where we come in, and education research with UDL-based solutions. So I put some links in there with recent updates to what's going on at CAS that you may wish to investigate at any time. Okay, next slide, please. So UDL has three main principles, all having to do with access. And the thing that I really like about UDL is that it is an umbrella for all the things that we are talking about in this colloquium, because it all really comes down to access and feeling comfortable in that access. So how do we do that? So these three principles are the foundation. We're going to give multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression, and multiple means of engagement. And that will allow as many teachers and students to share and learn together as possible. So of course we have to address curriculum, and that also is part of UDL, and they give that in 4 parts: instructional goals, methods, materials, and assessments, to increase access by reducing now all of these: physical, cognitive, intellectual, organizational, and I would now need to add cultural and racial obstacles that students find presented in the classroom. Well, if you find it presented everywhere. So why is UDL important? Well, it's because we're the ones that are designing this curriculum and delivering it and working with these students in the classroom. So how do we increase our abilities, our capabilities to do this? And how do we encourage students of color to consider going into teaching as a profession once they graduate from our schools? Because we need them. And I have had the privilege now, I consider, of teaching in many places in this country. And always I found a dichotomy. My students would come from multiple areas of color, or I worked with a lot of military kids who were just transient all over the place. Island students, students of multiple languages, but the staff at that schools, all those schools, did not look like those students. And so we always first had to build connections because we didn't reflect the culture that they come from. Okay, can I have next slide, please? So using UDL in the classroom looks different. It depends on where you are. So I taught for a long time in Santa Ana Unified at a couple different schools there. I taught in Westminster High School during the refugee crisis from Southeast Asia. And I taught in the islands of South Carolina, where we had migrant children, we had military children, town children, and African-American heirs land children. Heirs land was deeded to them post the Civil War. So it was quite a learning curve from a girl from metropolitan New York, northern New Jersey. But it gave me an opportunity to develop a lot of capabilities. And you, as classroom teachers, have also developed a lot of those capabilities based on your kinds of experiences. So a lot of what UDL is doing is taking what you already know and trying to help us put it in an understandable fashion in those 3 principles and how to make it better given the classroom environments that we're now finding ourselves in. So it looks different in every classroom, but there are commonalities. And there's a focus on building expert learning for all. So we need to make sure that all learners know the goal, There's options for students to use. We could put choice in there as one of those. Student accesses to resource. Now, this is really a challenge at the moment with remote learning and students building and internalizing their own learning. So I did include one very good resource that I have found for introducing UDL into your classroom as a K-12 person or as a university person. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I have a couple of graphics coming up that I'm sorry, I apologize for the resolution on them, but they were good at hitting the point I wanted to hit. So first we have providing multiple means of engagement. So this is one of the principles. So we have to stimulate motivation and sustain enthusiasm for learning in different ways. Well, of course, that looks different depending on grade level, depending on the students in your room, depending on what period you're teaching. Second one is provide multiple means of representation, because you're going to have students who do have physical disabilities. I've had kids with vision disabilities who were in wheelchairs, who had grand mal seizures occasionally. So we have to keep that constantly in mind. How can I present this in multiple ways? And then multiple means of action and expression. Offering options and supports so everyone can learn and share and create. I had an interesting experience. I am going to tell you one more story. I had a student that struggled all year. And one year I was working on animals with the students. I had brought in different presenters, a raptor rescue person brought in his raptor birds, and then nature person brought in their possums. And so, we were just learning about animals. Now this was high school, but it's urban high school, and it's not the type of place where kids see this stuff all the time. So it was great. So I was having them do some pictorial representations of things they were learning. And this one student who I'd had trouble with for a long time, his pictures just were amazing. So a whole new perspective opened up for this student, myself, and his peers. And we used that for the rest of the year. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this is just another graphic of the same thing, but it gives a few examples of ways to do it. So providing multiple means of representation, bigger formatted, highlighted information, so chunking, scaffolding, supplemental resources. And we encourage, of course, our student teachers to do all these things. Multiple means of action and expression, physical options, keyboards, mouse, and joystick. Well, now that's what we're doing for pretty much everything. Expression, text, speech, mapping, journals, portfolios, pictures, drawings, anything you can think of in there, and visuals. Checklists is something that are becoming more and more useful, and I'm hoping that we can look at that, not just from an academic perspective, but a cultural one as well, to help us recognize some of our own biases, because we all come with them, and sometimes we just don't see them. Okay, multiple means of engagement, feedback, peer tutoring, cooperative learning. This is the cooperative learning part is the big challenge with remote access. So maybe we need to figure out some ways to help them build their own little groups on Facebook or whatever else they're using, because we can't always do it using the platforms that we are given through our districts. And then self-management in utilizing charts, mentors, and peers. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so how would UDL look in the classroom? Now, this is a physical classroom, so a lot of these we're going to have to work on adapting for remote. Some of them are a little dated, but that doesn't mean they're not still very usable. Most of our programs are already working on all these pieces in the right-hand graphic, but I kind of liked the left-hand one because it was all visual, and it gave me a way to show the student what this would look like. Okay, when I'm talking about engagement with you guys, here's what that might look like. So I can actually show them that. So that is kind of a neat one. So if you are a Pinterest fan, which I am, you can find some just marvelous graphics on there that your teachers can use with their students. Okay, next slide, please. So here's something that is a piece of this that's really important given what we're talking about in our colloquium, and that is the social skills. We assume an awful lot about students' social skills, especially in a secondary environment, that are not really there. So we have to teach a lot of these community circles, other ways that we can work on teaching some of these social skills that will help them learn also. And that middle one on the left side, that seeing someone else's perspective is really key. If you can see it, no matter who's in the classroom, if you can at least see the other person's viewpoint, you don't have to agree with it, but at least look at it, that's a really important milestone for everyone, adults and students. So I am hoping that maybe we could work on some of these social skills as we build the learning environment within the classroom. And then of course, my student teachers are always asking me for help. What do I do with this student who has attention issues? And we provide the help that we can, but this is a nice little graphic to just remind us of some of the things we could be doing with those students. And it does not matter their age. This is a K through 12 challenge, so all these graphics apply. So I hope you will find this useful as well. Because again, that's a matter of access. The student who's unable to focus, they're not accessing what we need them to access. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so strategies for UDL, and I'm sure many of you have explored a zillion of them. I found these to be really good, particularly the last three, because now we are in the distance and remote learning environment. So that second to last one, that remote learning resources from CAST, is really good, and it's being continually built on. So I would encourage you to go ahead and maybe check out that link for sure.
All right.
So I'm real quick gonna do that myself on my desktop. Let's see. So if you could go ahead and open that link, the remote learning resources from CAST, if you could do that on another tab. You will see there that they have accessible materials and technologies, inclusive course design, and exploring guidelines. I think in order for us to be effective as observers, we need to be able to do those things. So now I'm going to ask that you, next slide. How are we as observers going to do that? So on the slide that is on the screen now, you'll see a link there. If you have your bit.ly open or the folder open, either one, you can click on that link, which is going to take you to a number of resources that have been shared with me. One just recently, the one that Beth Oriker showed you, we added to this folder. So that, I haven't had time to explore it, but looks awesome. I'm sure it will be very helpful. Just want to point out a couple things about the universal design graphics. So if you are in that folder, if you could open the document that says UDL guidelines, UCI, they're not really UCIs, but I just marked them that way for a title. You will see they are all numbered. Now, CAST has changed that, right? So if you go back to the folder, and you type on the other one that has the graphics for UDL, you see they've moved them around. The numbers are still there, but they've moved them around. Now I found that kind of confusing. So someone a couple of years ago in our program, another colleague of ours, a science supervisor, shared with me a document that I found really wonderful. So if you go to the UDL guidelines checklist in this folder, no matter where you put those numbers, you can use this checklist. Now, as you might have gathered by now, I'm a big fan of checklists. But in order for me to be able to tell if a student teacher was planning or implementing any of these aspects of UDL, I needed a way to get beyond just the numbers that were in that graphic. So this is a way to do that. So what does it mean to provide multiple means of representation? So here are guidelines. Under each guideline, there are suggestions. So you can use these as the observer, but you can also use them to help the student teachers understand what it is you're asking for them in UDL. So this thing has been just a massive help in supervision. And I like to maybe pick one or two to work on at a time with them, because you can't do all 6 at the same time, or rather all the principles at the same time, and meet the 6 TPEs. But it is a way at least to have a document that maybe we could move some of this around and put it into a protocol document to use for observation, along with the kind of things that Beth might offer in her document. Okay, so next slide, please. So I put in some additional resources that are also very excellent for being the observer in the classroom. How do we as observers mark down what we're seeing, and then how do we discuss this in a way with our student teachers as we go along? And then last slide, oh, I'm sorry, second to last slide, are discussion questions that I hope maybe we could address in whatever form, Evelyn, you might feel is good for that. So I know we're only supposed to put 2, but the first one is, how are your student teachers planning and implementing UDL principles in their lessons currently? So what are they doing now? Because maybe we need to find out what that is. And then what tool are we using now? And then going forward, how are we going to instruct and practice UDL in credentialing coursework and classroom going forward, both in the remote and the physical classroom? And what tool will we as supervisors use to do that? How are we going to see what's being done with UDL in those lessons?
I think these are great questions for all of us to think about as we go forward as supervisors.
Just in the last slide, I did put my contact information as well. I will make one more plug for Bitly, and I will say just be really careful what you post, because it stays there forever, literally. It is live with Google Slides. So you connect it to Google Slides. If you change your Google Slides, your Bitly will be updated. Not immediately, you have to close out and go back in, but you will see them there. So as an accessible piece of technology, it is incredible. So I encourage you to check it out. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all very much.